This article was written for Seventh-day Adventists only, mainly because the intense debate about whether there is or isn't a real prophecy about the 2520 years in Leviticus 26 is raging primarily in Adventist circles. First, I want to just stop right there. This prophecy of the 2520 is not only found in Leviticus 26, and I'll give you proof of that later. I personally became aware of this in 2011 at my home church in Washington State when some of my friends became believers in the 2520 teaching and began sharing it with others. Serious divisions resulted, and after a time, a sizable group was removed from membership. The whole affair was very unfortunate and painful to both sides. So the history of the 2520, where it begins, is in the northwest. This is true. And certain people started believing in it, and they were disfellowshipped for believing, and it caused division. Well, truth, it is the straight testimony. It is truth that causes the shaking. In a nutshell, 2520 advocates are sincerely convinced that the current resurgence of this teaching is from God to bring Adventism back to its original foundation and platform represented by the 1843 and 1850 Miller-Wright prophecy charts. If you take a closer look at the 1843 chart pictured here on this article to the left, you see the 2520 teaching right there in plain English. In 1850, Ellen White also wrote concerning that very chart. Before we do that, well, why don't we just look at the 1843 chart? There it is. That's what's being spoken of in the article, obviously. It's there. It's there twice. The 2300 days is there once. That's not to say that the 2300 days wasn't a more powerful teaching, but only to show you that the 2520 was no small matter. There is warrant. This is actually completely correct on the part of the 2520 believers. There is warrant for them believing that the fact that this teaching is coming back in world history at this time is a token from God that he's bringing his people back to the original platform and foundation. Why would I say that? Well, if we look at Miller's dream, the casket representing the truth was broken and buried beneath the rubbish, which represents, according to James White, the rubbish and error. And so the truth that God's people once had would be buried beneath the rubbish and error, and the dirt brush man would come in and brush it away. And then a bigger and more glorious casket was presented before Miller. And this gave him great comfort as he went through the disappointment. We also have inspired quotes which say things like, all the messages from 1840 to 1844 are to be made forcible now, for there are many people who have lost their bearings. So teachings that we once believed in, especially in this time frame from 1840 to 1844, which was the Great Advent movement, the Millerite movement, are to be made forcible now. They're to be made a test question now, for many have lost their bearings. And the messages are to go to all the churches, every Seventh-day Adventist church and every church beyond. The message was given, and there should be no delay in repeating the message, for the signs of the times are fulfilling. The closing work must be done. A great work will be done in a short time. A message will soon be given by God's appointment that will swell into a loud cry. Then Daniel will stand in his lot to give his testimony. So what we see here is that there is an admonishment, there is direction given, and that is, we need to get back to these old messages because there's a new message coming that will swell into a loud cry. Now, new light is not independent of old light, but an unfolding of it. So as we go back so in order to get to the end, we have to go back to the beginning. In order to get this new light, we have to understand first what we have been taught in the past. And that is the principle there. So the fact that some people over a decade ago were saying, hey, this 2520 teaching that we've rediscovered, this is in God's providence. This message is going to swell into a loud cry. It's important that we believe this. It was so important, in fact, that it caused serious divisions and a sizable group was removed. That should be really concerning, that the church would disfellowship people for having that belief. That's a very wholesome belief. It's an intelligent belief. it's reasonable at the very least, and it should be weighed out. Let's see if it truly ever was weighed out, or if it was rashly denied by these teachers like Stephen Bohr and Steve Wahlberg and others. Now, concerning the 1850 chart, Ellen White wrote concerning that chart, I've seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, and his hand was over a mistake in some of the figures so that none could see it until his hand was removed. That's the Spirit of Prophecy. That's the testimony of Jesus. That's an inspired statement. She's telling us not to alter the chart. She's telling us not to alter the chart in direct connection with the figures on the chart, and that there is a mistake singular in some of the figures plural. So if we go back to the 1843 chart, we see the 2520. This is the figures here on the chart. She's not speaking about, let's say, this rock on the image smiting the feet and calling those the figures. The figures are these mathematical computations. The first angel's message was the message in relation to time. In Great Controversy, it says that the first message, that this was ordered by God and was based on the computation of the prophetic periods. Knowing that about Adventist history, knowing that about Miss White's writings, when she's talking about the figures, she's speaking of this, the 2520, the 2300 days, and she's saying that there's a mistake singular. So the same mistake in the 2300 days would also be found in the 2520. She's saying there's a mistake singular in the figures plural. Okay, there's different figures. We have the 2520 figure, we have the 2300 day figures, and and there's the same mistake in both of them, and that would be 1843. And we know that from Adventist history that was the mistake. They originally thought that Christ would come back sometime between March 21st, 1843, and March 21st, 1844. 1843, as seen on the chart, encompasses the spring of 1844. They're not going January to January, they're going March to March. And so when Christ didn't come back by the spring of 1844, it plunged them into a tarrying time. And then the Midnight Cry came and explained how the 2520, Manasseh going into captivity in 677, actually commenced in the fall. So it would terminate in the fall as well. It would terminate in its respective year. And as the 2300 days, as Ezra actually didn't even make it to Jerusalem until the 5th month, which was August, and the decree didn't go into effect until the fall. So if the 2300 days terminates in the fall of its respective year, then it would commence, in the fall of its respective year, then it would also terminate in the fall of its respective year. And that's what the Midnight Cry message was. It also included the 6,000 years and the types and the anti-types as it regards the feasts. But that was the bulk of the message, was that these figures actually commence in the fall of their respective year. And so they therefore are going to terminate in the fall of their respective year. And therefore 1843 was a mistake. Okay, so that's what that was all about. That's what the mistake is all about. That's the context of everything. That's the context of everything. So his hand hid that mistake. They didn't see that. Why didn't they see that? That's a good question. Why was there a mistake? Why didn't they see that? Well, let's go to Habakkuk chapter 2. Let's go to Habakkuk chapter 2. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. So this is prophetically Habakkuk 2,500 years earlier, from the point that the vision was made plain upon tables, saw that it would be made plain upon tables, saw that the vision of Daniel would be made plain upon tables, and this would help people that grasp the message so that they would be able to run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Now they originally thought that the appointed time was 1843. Right? That's what they originally thought. However, God is saying, the vision is yet for an appointed time, and at the end it shall speak and not lie. Why would he have to say that? Because it's going to seem to fail. The vision is going to seem to fail. They were predicting he's coming back in 1843, and he didn't come. And God's saying, it didn't lie. It didn't lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Though it tarry beyond the apparent termination, the false termination that you guys set up. You guys were close, but you needed to just tweak your math a little bit. There was a mistake in your calculations. You thought the prophetic periods began in the spring of their year, so you're terminating them in the spring of the year of their respective years. But it's going to come. It will not tarry. The midnight cry is going to let you know that the prophetic periods actually go down to the autumn of 1844. Now, this is the same thing in Matthew 25 with the parable of the 10 virgins. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. There's a tarrying time. And at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. They understood that they were in the prophecy. They understood where they were in prophetic time. That's why they called it the midnight cry message. And the midnight cry message explained the mistake. It explained the mistake in the 2520. It explained the mistake in the 2300 days. That's a biblical truth, but that's also an historical fact. That is also a historical fact. So when we're reading this, I've seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord. He was the one that told us to make it plain upon tables, and that should not be altered. It should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them. You are not to alter any of these figures. That's what inspiration is saying. Miss White is saying, do not touch the 2520. Do not touch the 2300 days. These teachings come from the Bible. Do not touch them. Woe unto anybody that would stir up a block or move a pin of this message, the angel says. There is a judgment, there is a curse upon you if you're going to try to undermine these teachings. That is what inspiration is getting at. He hid his hand over the mistake in some of the figures so that none could see it until his hand was removed. And that would be 1843. It wasn't covering the 2520, right? It was just, or the 2300 days, it was just covering what's beneath the line there of 677 and 457. 1843 was being covered, not the 2520. That was never being covered. This is perhaps the most important quotation in the 2520 controversy. The mistake referred to above primarily concerned not the 2520 timeline itself, but the Millerite miscalculation of the 2300 days of Daniel 8:14 and the 2520. I don't know why they left that out as well. I don't know why they left that out. It was the mistake also concerned the 2520. All you would have to do is come to the Ellen White writings, the Pioneer writings, and type in SSS like that, Samuel Sheffield Snow, and you get the midnight cry message. This was the message that was spread like the leaves of autumn. That's where that phrase comes from, as far back as I understand. And you look at the 5 points, you see the 6,000 years. So they originally thought the 6,000 years began in the spring. They were able to prove that it actually began in the fall, and the 6,000th year of world history terminated in the fall of 1844. Also, with the 7 times of the Gentiles, you've heard that phrase by Christ, the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, the trotting down of Jerusalem and the host. That's the same that Moses is speaking of. The prophets being subject to the prophets, Christ being the greatest of the prophets, also spoke of the curse of Moses as well. And the curse would be relinquished after 1844, and God would have a people again. He'd start to gather the 144,000 again, stealing 12,000 out of each tribe with the Sabbath truth. He would have a people, just like he brought Ezra at the beginning of the 2300 days out of Babylon to rebuild the temple. So at the end of the 2300 days, we get the sanctuary message, the one true God message, the third angel's message that seals us into the truth. And God has a people again. All the 12 tribes are being gathered again. That's what the 7 times doctrine proves. And this is the second point of the midnight cry. And so he explains the mistake in the 2520, then the 2300 days. So this idea that the mistake only refers to the 2300 days is just not even historically accurate. It's a cover up. the midnight cry teaching that it's the light behind us and it shines all the way to the celestial city, and those that rashly deny the light behind us fall off the path. So those that rashly deny, let's say the 7 times of the Gentiles found in this doctrine, rashly deny this light, they fall off the path. Um, or those like David Gates and Walter Wyeth, who preached the 6,000 years extends beyond 1844 and that we need to get ready for 2027. This is a horrendous teaching, a very, very a teaching that really undermines Adventism and the strength of Adventism. The fact that the 6,000 years ends in 1844 is one of the strongest evidences for the Adventist faith, as well as the 7 times that the curse of Moses, that the scattering, the captivity of God's people, they had been a marginalized people, a people that have been scattered and splintered into many different groups throughout the earth, living in the mountains, and that after 1844, in a nation that has a constitution, that they would be able to practice religious freedom and promote their views unrestricted and gather together a people before Christ comes back. That is extraordinarily strong evidence for the Adventist faith. You could, in theory, you could be a Sabbath keeper and not a Seventh-day Adventist. You could be a one true God believer and not a Seventh-day Adventist. You could have the health message and still not be a Seventh-day Adventist. But you can't believe that the 7 times of the Gentiles, the scattering of God's people, commenced in 677 and then terminated in 1844, and not accept the Adventist faith. Because what that is saying, because this identifies who God's true people are, and that's why it's the very first pillar of Adventism. That's why it's the very foundation of Adventism, and that's why it's significant. Because there's many different. You could even believe in the spirit of prophecy. I believe there's people that hold Ellen White's views in high regard, but aren't necessarily Seventh-day Adventists. They think, oh, these are great books. We'll let our kids read them and things like that. But if you truly understood the 7 times of the Gentiles, if you truly understood the 2520, you would be convicted that the Seventh-day Adventist faith is the only true denomination, and that's God's people, and God knows no other people besides that people. And so that's why this doctrine is so heavily attacked, and that's why God set up this particular truth as the commencement of the chain of truth, and we are under obligation to believe this truth. And this is why this truth needs to be strengthened and proclaimed. It's a glorious truth. It's a glorious teaching. So back to this, the mistake referred to above primarily concerned not the 2520 timeline itself, but the Millerite miscalculation of the 2300 prophecy of Daniel 8:14. Just simply a false statement, because there's an omission there. And again, I don't know if it's out of ignorance or if it's disingenuous, but it's there. And it's the mistake also is dealing with the 2520 as well. Brethren, as I'm recording this, I'm noticing something that I hadn't seen originally. And that is, in a very subtle way, they are admitting that the spirit of prophecy does indeed refer to the 2520. I'm going to read the sentence one last time to you. The mistake referred to above primarily concerned not the 2520 timeline itself, but the Millerite miscalculation of the 2300-day prophecy of Daniel 8:14. So we see here this word primarily is a qualifying word. It doesn't say the mistake referred to above does not concern the 2520, but that the quote or the teaching of the Adventists emphasizes the 2300 days far more than the 2520, but indeed the mistake was also found in the 2520, and therefore the spirit of prophecy is also referring to that as well. The most important quotation of the 2520, the mistake referred to in this quote,
It refers to the 2520 a little bit, but mostly the 2300 days. That's actually what the sentence says. The sentence is actually admitting that the 2520 is true. And so it seems that the author of this article does understand that the spirit of prophecy does indeed speak of the 2520. Now, I would like to say that if you study the 2520 out in depth, if you go back to the messages of 1840 and 1844, it was not on one prophetic period alone that they relied on, but on the harmonious termination of multiple prophetic periods coming to their end. They were going by the weight of evidence. And the 2520 was a major pillar. So they emphasized the 2520 a lot. They emphasized the 2300 days more, but they also emphasized the 2520 quite a bit. And it was an impressive truth to them, and it motivated them to stand on October 22nd, 1844, and look for the Lord. So in the quote, he's trying to downplay the 2520, but he does understand that the SOP is referring to it. That's at least what his own words say, and his own words are testifying against him. So I thought that was very interesting, and I wanted to share that with you. Okay, back to the presentation.
And that also goes back to prove that Miss White, the spirit of prophecy, does talk about the 2520. The figures are not to be altered. What does that mean? The 2520 is not to be altered. That's what that means. The 2300 days is not to be altered. The mistake related to it in some of the figures, that is to be altered. And we'll show you, she makes that qualifying statement in another quote. Anyways, good. After the great disappointment on October 22nd, it's supposed to say 44, that's fine. That mistake was corrected on the 1850 chart. Because Miss White wrote that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord and should not be altered, 2520 believers conclude that the rest of the chart, including the 2520 prophecy, remains as present truth for us today. That is a true statement. Present truth, first and second angels' messages are still present truth today. I will show you a quote really quick. Let's look at two quotes. Let's look at two principles really quick here. When the power of God testifies as to what is truth, that truth is to stand forever as the truth. No after supposition contrary to the light God has given are to be entertained. Men will arise with interpretations of Scripture which are to them truth, but which are not truth. The truth for this time God has given us as a foundation of our faith. He himself has taught us what is truth. One will arise and still another with new light, which contradicts the light that God has given under the demonstration of the power of the Holy Spirit. Did you see how it says he himself has taught us what is truth? That God has given this message, that God has given it, the light that God has given. The 2520, 2300 days, these truths are the truths that God taught us. So man can never come along later, even if he's a godly man, even if he's sincere, it can never be undone. Once God testifies, when the power of God testifies as to what is truth, it stands forever as the truth. Now, the standard bearers who have fallen in death are to speak through the reprinting of their writings. I'm instructed that their voices are to be heard. They're to bear their testimony as to what constitutes truth for this time. Now, this quote is very much written in reference to those who labored under the third angel's message. So those who had experienced the sanctuary, had been part of this, the rise of the sanctuary message, the sealing message, the one true God message, they called it the personality of God in Christ. Those old landmarks, they are to be reprinted and they are to be shared. However, this principle still applies to those who labored under the first and second angel's messages. The former messages were given before 1844. The third angel's message was given after 1844. And I will prove that to you now. I will prove that to you now. The proclamation of the first, second, and third angels' messages has been located by the word of inspiration. I don't think I finished my thought completely from before. I'm going to prove to you that the first and second angels' messages were given before 1844, and therefore the principles are the same. The point was those who labored in the third angel's message constitute what the third angel's message is. God gave that message. He gave it under the demonstration of the Holy Spirit. Those who experienced that message, who know what it is, the people that God gave it to, they tell us what the truth is because it's still the truth and will always be the truth. Now, that principle applies for those under the first and second angel's message. It doesn't only apply to those under the third angel's message. There is a group those in PHM and other ministries like that. It seems to be pretty prevalent in the one true God message, where they accept this quote as it pertains to the third angel's message. But when you try to republish the writings or share the teachings of those that labored under the first and second angel's message, those messages which were prophesied to be lost, prophesied to be buried beneath the rubbish, and then you try to explain, well, we're at the end of the world, and the dirt brush man will give these things back to us, and God testified that this was truth, and we are to have no after supposition contrary to that the first and second angels' messages are to be proclaimed now, that they are to be made forcible now. They can't accept that. They don't accept that for some reason. They only think truth existed after 1844, that there was no truth, essentially. That if somebody was ignorant of some truth after 1844, if James White didn't believe something or Uriah Smith didn't believe something that people had believed prior, then their unbelief is stronger or is more credible than the demonstration of the power of the Holy Spirit before 1844. Miss White says, "Blessed are the eyes that saw the things in 1843 and 1844. Blessed are your eyes for they hear." And Christ says, "Blessed are your eyes for they hear, your eyes for they see, and your ears hear." For many righteous men desire to look into the things that you're looking into. Miss White says, "Blessed." Same is true of 1843 and 1844. Blessed are the eyes that saw the things in 1843 and 1844. But Uriah Smith's unbelief about those things is accepted as a catechism or some sort of dogma or creed. That unbelief is a wicked unbelief, and it needs to be rebuked. Hopefully you sigh and cry for that abomination too. It's a reprehensible, wicked unbelief. The proclamation of the first, second, and third angels' messages has been located by the pen of inspiration. Why are we here on this quote again? I need to bring us back after going on that tangent. The reason that we are here is because I'm proving to you that the former messages were given before 1844. The first and second angels' messages were given before 1844, and therefore only those who preached in those messages before 1844 can constitute what those messages are. We can get new light from them, but only by accepting the testimony from those people who gave that message. It's not that we can't understand more or see further than they did or have a better comprehension of it, but we cannot reject the truth. There's no after supposition is to be made contrary to the truth which God has given. Now, so that's why we're here. The proclamation of the first and second and third angels' messages has been, this word is important, located by the pen of word of inspiration. It's located in time. I'll show you that. Not a peg or pin is to be removed. No human authority has any more right to change the location of these messages than to substitute the New Testament for the Old. It doesn't matter what position they have in the church. It doesn't matter what church they're a part of. There's no human authority. It doesn't matter if they have some other truth. It doesn't matter if they are a prophet. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, no human authority. Humans cannot change the location of these messages. They cannot change these doctrines. They cannot change the truth. The Old Testament is the gospel in figures and symbols. This sin is so egregious. It would be the same as if we started to just remove verses from the Old Testament and say we don't need that anymore, we don't believe that anymore, or the New Testament. or substituting the New Testament for the Old Testament. We'll just go with this. We'll just go with the third angel. We don't really need the first angel anymore. It's the same sin, but in the microcosm of Adventism. And so I rebuke PHM and those ministries for doing that. That's sin. That is wrong. The Old Testament is the gospel in figures and symbols. The New Testament is the substance. One is as essential as the other. The Old Testament presents lessons from the lips of Christ, and these lessons have not lost their force in any particular. Hey, that's that word force again. All the messages from 1840 to 1844 are to be made forcible now, because they also haven't lost their force in any particular. The next line is going to prove that. Listen, the first and second angels' messages were given in 1843 and 1844. That's when they were given. God gave them to us in those years. And no human authority is able to change that. That's what it means to be located by the pen of inspiration. Inspiration is telling us that this is when they were given. This is when they were given, and that is when the truth was given. It is truth, and it's going to stand forever as the truth. And no after supposition contrary to the light God has given is to be entertained. It's not to be even. You are to show no hostility to it. You are to show no hostility to it. That's what it means to entertain it. You are not to welcome it. It should disgust you. It should be a bad stench in your nose. The first and second angels' messages were given in 1843 and 1844, and we are now under the proclamation of the third, but all three messages are still to be proclaimed. It is just as essential now as ever before that they shall be repeated to those who are seeking the truth. So how do we get to the truth? How do we get to the truth of the former messages? They've been located by inspiration in these years. So we go back to these years and we merely open up the publications and we start to study them. By pen and voice, we are to sound the proclamation showing their order and the application of the prophecies that bring us to the third angel's message. There cannot be a third without a second and first, or first and second. These messages we are to give to the world in publications and discourses showing in the line of prophetic history the things that have been and the things that will be. Now, when we look actually on the chart, we see what these messages are. They're being brought to view. These truths of the Bible are being brought to view. Now, one thing that's interesting here is that these messages are to be proclaimed. The question is, well, how do we do that? How do we proclaim these messages? If I come here, let me see if I can find this for us really quick. Okay, found it quick. Praise the Lord. The truths that we received in 1841, 1842, 1843, and 1844 are now to be studied and proclaimed. The messages of the first, second, and third angels will in the future be proclaimed with a loud voice. Now, we already learned from the other quote that the first and second were given in these years, in 1843 and 1844. We learned that. And notice that we are studying these for a reason. There's a reason why we're studying these old messages, because the loud cry is coming. Now we have a second witness. We already read one quote where that was the case, right? All the messages given from 1840 to 1844 are to be made forcible now, for there are many people who have lost their bearings. The messages are to go to all the churches. The message was given. And then it says here, a message will soon be given by God's appointment that will swell into a loud cry. There it is. The message are to be given. They're to be made forcible now. And this was the first witness. Hey, a loud cry is coming. New light's not independent of old light. You need this old light. And then here it's the same thing. The truths that we received in 41, 42, 43, 44 are now to be studied and proclaimed. The messages of the first and second and third angels will in the future be proclaimed with a loud voice. The loud cry is coming. Study these old messages. New light is going to unfold out of these old messages. They will be given with earnest determination and in the power of the Spirit. Inspiration says that the 1843 chart should not be altered, they insist. Our church has lost sight of the 2520 and must return to its foundations in order to be ready for the latter rain, loud cry, and second coming. The Holy Spirit is bringing the prophecy back to us, and if we resist his special message, we are fighting against God. That's what they say. Remember, this person was he was a part of this movement. He was the antagonist. He was a part of the antagonism of this movement, but he was part of it in the early days when this was emerging in the northwestern United States. I personally became aware of this in 2011 at my home church in Washington State, when some of my friends became believers in the 2520 teaching. This is right on the border of Washington State and Idaho. And they began to share it with others. Serious divisions resulted, and after a time, a sizable group was removed from membership. The whole affair was very unfortunate and painful to both sides. And what were they saying? This is what they're saying, what inspiration is saying. They're saying our church has lost sight of the 2520 and must return to its foundations. That's what the Spirit of Prophecy says. All the messages from 1840 to 1844 to being forcible now, many have lost their bearings. A message is soon coming. We need to get ready for the latter rain. Let's get back to learning about the chart. Let's understand the midnight cry and the tarrying time. Let's understand the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, the 10 virgins, which are preparing themselves to see Christ come. We don't want to be foolish virgins. We want to be the wise ones. Let's understand how this parable has been fulfilled. So, because this message is going to go out again, and history repeats, and it will be fulfilled again to the very letter. Ms. White calls that present truth for this time. Hopefully everybody's familiar with that quote. So these people this is 100% correct. These people were right. As you can imagine, the result has been intense controversy between those who truly believe this reasoning and those who don't. Okay, he's going to affirm his faith in William Miller and his associates, but then he's going to denigrate William Miller. We'll see that in a second. I'm gonna skip down a little bit, and I have this opened up in this document. This is what we're reading. So the first point is the 2520 is a divine prophecy embedded in Leviticus 26. He's outlining what the 2520s believers are believing. He's delineating each point. And so this is the first point. They say that 2520 is a divine prophecy embedded in Leviticus 26. So they're saying the 2520 is a divine prophecy embedded in Leviticus 26. Apollos Hale saying, why consider the 7 times of Leviticus a prophetic period? Answer, that is the first meaning we should think of attaching to the text. If the word times did not occur in other parts of the Word of God, when chronological arrangement are spoken of, there would be some show of propriety in demanding the reasons for so understanding it in this case. In other words, 7 times often means time. 7 times often is referring to years in the Bible. And so we should understand it in this case, in that sense. It's the first meaning we should attach to the text. That's different than the idea in embedded. Embedded that's not the apparent reason. That the idea that it's a prophetic period is not the apparent reason, but some sort of esoteric, mysteriously buried reason. It's some shadowy interpretation that you're giving. I think embedded gives off a negative connotation, is what I'm saying in this context. The 2520 is a divine prophecy embedded in Leviticus 26. Hales is like, it's the first meaning you should think of attaching to the text. It's the first thing that should come to your mind when reading it. Time. Time means years. If we're comparing scripture with scripture, that's how it's used in other parts of the Word of God. Time means years. Time means time, in other words. Also, you have Ezekiel 39:9. I'd mentioned earlier that Leviticus 26 is not the only place that the 2520 doctrine arises in Scripture. And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth and shall set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and bucklers and bows and arrows, and the hand staves and the spears, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years. So here's a very interesting prophecy about Israel burning weapons on fire, shields and bucklers, bows and arrows. You can imagine in your mind this enormous mountain of uh, um, of military equipment being burned for 7 years. Now you have to ask yourself, is that literal or is that figurative? Now, if you believe it's figurative, then the 7 years are 2520. That's simple. If you believe it's literal, then you believe it's some 7 year period. And it's some 7 year period before 1844 because there's no time period after 1844. And so please tell us when is the 7 year prophecy. Now, if you understand that this is a prophecy speaking of the 2520 and the curse of Moses, and this is actually connected to Leviticus 26 and the other prophecies in the Old Testament, you have no problem harmonizing it. You start to see something beautiful and wonderful as you dig into Ezekiel 39 deeper. So they have to choose. Do they want this? Is this literal 7 years or is this prophetic 7 years? We, like the Millerites, say this is 7 prophetic years. We, like true Adventists, say that this is 7 prophetic years. That's not, I wouldn't use the word embedded here to describe the 2520. In Leviticus 26, the Lord warned that if Israel disobeyed, he would punish her several times for her sins. Those 7 times actually represent 7 years, or 2520, which the day for year principle means 2520 years. Because William Miller believed that the 2520 prophecy began in 677 when King Manasseh was taken into Babylon and ended in 1844, those dates should be considered to be correct, and they are correct. 677 stands beyond the point of impeachment. We have the 65-year prophecy, or the 65 years of Isaiah chapter 7, which stretches from 742 to 677. Esarhaddon came in the year 677. Manasseh was taken into captivity that year. 7 times from that point is 1844. God's people went into captivity because of the sins of Manasseh, Jeremiah tells us. Jeremiah 15:4. Judah's independence ceased forever from that point in history. They were no longer an independent nation. The first judgment enumerated under the 7 times is that he would break the pride of her power. Manasseh was the pride and the civil power of the nation. So that stands beyond impeachment. This is historically a fact. Good. Now, let's get into this. Let's get into the 1843 should not be altered except by inspiration. I saw that the old chart was directed by the Lord and that not a figure of it should be altered except by inspiration. According to them, these words clarify that the 1843 chart can be appropriately altered as long as it is done by inspiration. I want to stop really quick there and just look at the quote in its entirety, because they're only giving you a little piece of the quote. I saw that the truth should be made upon tables, and that the earth and the fullness thereof is the Lord's, and that necessary means should not be spared to make it plain. This was right after the disappointment. People had already sold their houses, sold all their belongings off. These were the poor people. These were also a young church. So it was made up of people, older people that had sold off, but just a lot of younger people that hadn't accumulated a lot of wealth. So it's not a church that has a lot of means. But for this chart, don't have fear. The Lord will support you if you support this cause. Have faith. I know you're in poverty. I know you don't have much to give, but give to this 1850 chart. That's what's being said. So now we sense the gravity of all this. I saw that the old chart was directed by the Lord, and not a figure of it should be altered except by inspiration. Look at the next clause. This was what was left out. I saw that the figures of the chart were as God would have them, and that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures, so that none should see it until it was removed. Now they just leave that out. They just leave that out. I don't know. I don't know how anybody could do that. I saw that the old chart was directed by the Lord and that not a figure of it should be altered except by inspiration. And then go on to say the chart can be altered if it's done by inspiration. Stop it for a minute and think. If the 1843 chart was perfect, except for the mistake that was later corrected, then why would Ellen White even add that it should not be altered except by inspiration? If flawless, what to alter? This extra clause implies that as time advances, there may indeed be a few more things that need to be altering. But if so, inspiration must do it. So what they're saying is there's not just one mistake. Ms. White says that there's a mistake singular and the figures plural, but that there's lots of mistakes. There's different mistakes. There could be more mistakes. It's really just open to their interpretation. And I guess they're assuming inspiration or something. If we look closely again at the quote, and not a figure of it should be altered except by inspiration, I saw that the figures of the chart were as God would have them, the figures plural. So more than just the 2300 days. God put them there. Those are in fact, inspiration is telling us that those are inspired teachings. Those are infallible teachings. Again, let me say that very clear. The 2520 is an infallible teaching. The 2300 days, Ms. White says, stands without impeachment. God put them there. God would have them there. Don't alter them, he says. The angel says, woe unto them that would stir a block or a pin from these messages. There is a curse upon you, again, if you would try to move these messages. They are not to be altered. The figures are where he wanted them. Inspiration is going to surgically remove the mistake. That's what's going to be altered. It's apparent. It's very apparent why inspiration would need to surgically remove something, because there is a mistake. There is a mistake, and that's 1843 is sounded on the chart. Now, in 1850 chart, that mistake was removed, and the 7 times was not removed. The counsel was followed. The counsel was followed. In the bottom right-hand corner where my cursor is moving around, we see the 7 times there, first thing. And then also, I'm having trouble navigating this. And then also at the top of the chart, we see the 7 times still there. The figures were not moved. The mistake was altered, but the figures were not moved. The figures are where God wanted them on both charts. You have 2 witnesses. Now, why? There's a great irony here. It says, if the 1843 chart was perfect except for the mistake that was later corrected, then why would Ellen White even add that it should not be altered except by inspiration? Well, that's because there was a mistake. The mistake was going to need to be altered. God didn't want them throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He was, even in the prophecy, he says it would speak and not lie. I do not want you to doubt that the 2520 was, I do not want you to doubt that the 2300 days was true. That's what people started to do. That was the whole controversy after 1844. Confusion came in, and people started to push the prophetic periods into the future. God wanted them to know, I was in the midnight cry. I was in the preaching of the first angel's message and the second angel's message that separated you from the other churches. I don't want you to doubt that. The chart is going to be altered, but just the mistake. Inspiration is telling us that there was a little mistake that needs to be carefully removed, but don't move anything else. Don't move the figures. They're just where I wanted them. And the reason, another reason why this was said, and here's the great irony of it all, is if we come to Isaiah 29, it talks about a people here that are drunk, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with strong drink. And the vision of all of them has become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed. Now, this is the book that was sealed was the little book of Daniel. and it was sealed until the time of the end. And this was the vision that was also made plain upon tables. And so there's a drunk class of seers, of prophets, of teachers, of rulers in the church that don't understand this, that are preaching against this message of the 2520, of the 2300 days. And it says that they have erred through strong drink. They are swallowed up of wine. They are out of the way through strong drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment. For all tables are full of vomit and filthiness, so that there is no clean place. They're vomiting on the tables. They're filling it with all manner of filthiness. And it's because they're spiritually drunk. They're drunk on the wine of Babylon. This is going to be an important point because we're going to see that the arguments that the fallen churches were given in 1844 against the 2520 are still the same arguments that these people are giving today. They're drunk on the wine of Babylon and they're throwing up on the chart. You are seeing the fulfillment of these verses in articles like this. You're witnessing the fulfillment of these prophecies that Isaiah spoke about so many years ago. Next question, what does except by inspiration mean? Does it mean that any subsequent alteration must come from Ellen White herself or from any other prophet? Or could it mean that it can be altered by inspiration from God as he leads his people onward into greater light? Let inspiration provide the answer. Remember that we read that no human authority can alter the truth. Miss White has told us what is truth. She tells us that the 2520 is truth. She tells us that 2300 days is a portion of the same great prophetic period, the one that the Millerites were proclaiming was the longest and last prophetic period brought to view in the Bible. It's right here, the 2520. Remember that according to Millerite understanding, that the longest period, this is January 10th, 1844, if the longest period was to be paramount, the 7 times would take precedent of all others. And that the 7 times is one of our strong evidences, and it should not be rejected without the most weighty reasons. If you look at this publication from March 20th, 1844, I was led to study the Bible relative to the 7 times, part of which are referred to in the book of Daniel. This was recently after listening to Brother Miller's lectures. So this is what Miller was preaching. The result has been confirmation of my hopes from the light reflected from this single point. If we should yield up the 2300 days and the 70 weeks, these, however, are but fractions of the 7 times. They're fractions of the 7 times. They're portions of the 7 times. Is that what Miss White says too in her writings concerning the 2520? She says Miller and his associates proclaimed that the longest and last prophetic period brought to view in the Bible was about to expire. If she's saying that that's the 2300 days, then she's either lying, which she wouldn't do, or she doesn't know history, because they weren't proclaiming that the longest and last was the 2300 days. They were proclaiming that it was the 2520. And they were proclaiming that the 2300 days was a portion or a fraction of that period. Now, is that what she's saying? The preaching of each, the 70 weeks and 2300 days, was based upon the fulfillment of a different portion of the same great prophetic period, the longest and last brought to view in the Bible. That we entered, this is September 25th, 1844, they're getting very close to the great disappointment, that we have entered upon the most deeply affecting season. All must admit that the longest prophetic period which brings the end of view is the 7 times. The Millerites were proclaiming that the longest and last prophetic period brought to view in the Bible was about to expire. Which one were they saying it was? They were saying it was the 7 times. Were they saying it was a portion? The 2300 days was a portion of that? Yes, that's what they were teaching. Is that what Miss White says that they were doing? Yes. She said that the 2300 days is a portion of that same great prophetic period, and she literally uses the same exact language, that they were proclaiming that the long and last prophetic period, which is brought to view, was about to expire. And it's brought to view right here on the chart. 2520 is longer than 2,300 days. Now they're saying anybody can come along, basically. That they believe, these people that are vomiting over these charts, that are drunk on the wine of Babylon, they think they're God's church, and they think that they're inspired, and they're gonna do away with the 2520. That's what these people are saying. William Miller and the Millerites had errors. This is an important section too. As stated previously, God definitely led William Miller in his associate Advent preachers. So they're going to do they're giving some lip service. Then they're also denigrating them by telling them they had errors. Errors in reference to the third angel's message, errors in reference to things that God hadn't even taught his people yet, but not errors in relation to the first angel's message. But notice this clear statement from a holy angel about the Millerites right after. Let me qualify that statement. I said there might be inconsequential, small, extraordinarily small mistakes within the first angel's message that doesn't materially change anything, but every major pillar or point again stands without impeachment. So that's what I mean when I say that the Millerites didn't have any errors when it came to the first angel's message. Not that every single I was dotted or T was crossed, but that overall that they had the truth. It was they didn't have any gross error. The main first pillar, the 2520 on the chart, that wasn't error. They didn't have that would be inconceivable. But that's what they would have you believe. Let me go down a quick tangent again. I say this, but I just really want this on the recording. I've never met anybody, having done this for almost 10 years now, I've never yet met one Adventist who rejected the 2520 that accepted any of the other main pillars of the first angel's message that is not widely held. So for instance, I've never met someone that believed that the 6,000 years terminated in 1844, but that the 2520 was false, or that the Jubilee cycle, the 2450, is true, but the 2520 is false, or the 2,000 years of Hosea is true, but the 2520 is false. Those that reject the 2520 reject pretty much the entirety of the first angel's message. So I see them as synonymous. I see them as two sides of the same coin. When somebody doesn't believe in the 2520, they don't believe in the first angel's message, in my mind, in my estimation. Said my accompanying angel, they are again disappointed in their expectations. Jesus cannot yet come to earth. They must endure great trials for his name's sake. They must give up errors and traditions received from men and turn wholly to the word, the God in his word. They must be purified, made white, and tried. Those who endure that bitter trial will obtain eternal victory. So they needed to give up their 2520. That doctrine that they were believing in, that the scattering God's people was about to end and they should sell their house. They needed to give up that before Christ could come back. It was actually the 2520 that they needed to give up before that they were ready to see the Lord. The fallen churches were actually right. All those things about the 2450 and the 6,000 years and the 2520, the things that they were belaboring and going on and on about, and especially dwelling on, they needed to give that up. They were wrong about all that. How long shall it be till the end of these wonders? When Christ has accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. They went in the Bible, they figured out when the scattering time commenced, they figured out when it would end. Christ didn't come. That's what caused the disappointment. That was one of the main reasons that caused the disappointment. God orchestrated the disappointment to test his people, to see if they would believe that he had been leading them in these things. And those are the very things that they're telling people that they have to give up. That those are the errors. He wasn't purified. They must be purified. Miller had errors. They must be purified. This would be a bitter trial, but worth the struggle. So let's go to what James White says, because we're going to read what James White said next. In 64, when he was suffering with really bad paralysis and his mind wasn't fit to write the review, versus what he was saying when his mind was clear. So he says in April 1854, the 2520 is it's starting to phase out around this, maybe 2 years later. It's Hiram Edson seems 2 years later seems to be the last year that it was published, but in 1850 it was being published by James White, 51, 52, 53. This is what he's saying in 54. James White has published much more on the 2520 than he's published against it. This is the only thing that I know of that he's ever said against it. Maybe there's an anonymous 1880 article that might be him too. I'm not sure whose that is, but all that exists against the 2520 in published writings is this, the 1880 anonymous article, the appendix of Daniel Revelation, and Loughborough's anti-2520 article. We're not going to get into all those, but they're all very, very foolish. Anyways, let's look at what James White was saying in 54. We are the Adventists, says the leading man among those who profess to adhere to the views taught by William Miller, when in fact they have given up many of the strong points of difference between William Miller and his opponents. But what is called out this new sect, or a class of believers from which this sect has been formed, which claims and glories in the name of Adventist? We answer, first, the doctrine of the second Adventist taught by William Miller, or the announcement of the first angel, the hour of his judgment has come. Second, that strong movement in 1844 occasioned by the proclamation of the words of the second angel, which brought them away from the different churches to which they belong. So that's what an Adventist is. Those who adhere to the teachings of William Miller under the first angel's message, and those who are part of the second angel's message, which brought them out of the churches. So the churches rejected the first angel's message, and then they started to pronounce those who rejected the first angel's message as Babylon. And that's what an Adventist is. So you're not an Adventist if you don't believe in these teachings. These two great movements called out the Advent people from the different churches, and a portion of them now claim the name Adventists. But strange to tell, they regard the very movements that called them from the churches and made them a distinct people decidedly wrong. Most of them called the doctrines they then held errors, and the influences which moved them to separate from the brethren of the several churches delusive. Then why have they not, like honest men and women, retraced those steps that they took in error's path? Why not frankly confess their former brethren of the churches who stood so nobly against the Advent movement in 43 and 44 that those movements were delusions? Now, those movements were either wrong and a complete delusion, or they were under special providence of God and as a whole right. If they were wrong, then those who were influenced by them to leave the churches should not at once go back to those churches, confess their errors, and unite with them again. Is it not perfect folly to glory in the distinguishing name of Adventists, then turn around and curse the very means that made them a distinct people? And this is what Stephen Bohr and Wahlberg are doing now. If these movements were right, then it is right to remain separate from those churches, which the Advent people separated from to enjoy their freedom. But let such highly prize these angels' messages, which made them a distinct people. Continuing. Now, if it be right for any people to claim the name of Adventists, but we doubt the propriety of claiming any such is, certainly that class who have given up the strong points of the original Advent faith as taught by William Miller, and now regard as error and delusive the very messages and influences which called them from the churches and made them a distinct people, should be the very last to claim the name Adventists. So the strong points of the original Advent faith as taught by William Miller is the commencement of the chain of truth. The 2520 strong point is the first pillar of the Advent message. The 2520, a strong point. Mr. Miller would give lectures on the 7 times. Is that a strong point? Everything that I just said is a matter of historical fact and inspiration. We claim to stand on the original Advent faith, therefore do not reject the past movements on this great question, which have called out a people to prepare for the coming of the Lord. And as to the great fundamental doctrines taught by William Miller, we see no reason to change our views. We claim all the light of the past time on this glorious theme and cherish it as from heaven. They were still, I have not seen any evidence to the contrary that they were not believing in the 2520 at this time. In the years 1850, 51, 52, and I believe even 53, they were still publishing that doctrine in the previous 4 years leading up to this article. And I see nothing against it until James White's article in 64, when he essentially had lost his mind. And we cheerfully let the providence of God and plain Bible testimony correct our past view of the sanctuary and give us a more harmonious system of truth and a firmer basis of faith. While the Advent occupies its present position, it may be expected that its columns will be enriched with the spiritual articles upon the second Advent from the pens of William Miller, Litch, Fitch, Hale, Storrs, and others, written 10 or 12 years since. Unfortunately, I don't think that was realized. Maybe you have some evidence to the contrary, but in the prior years, 1850, 51, 52, they were publishing these men's writings a lot, and the devil was raging against James White, and even tried to kill his young baby at the time, which would have been Edson, I want to say. Now, interesting, when he got up this 63 chart, 64 chart, 63 chart and the 64 article, it was in that era of time that his eldest son caught a cold, having fallen asleep on the backing of the 1863 chart, and unfortunately passed away. But there is a curse, there is a judgment. It's woe unto anybody that would remove any of these things. James White was absolutely, certainly under judgment from God after rejecting this. That is some sort of providential sign in history that James White's eldest son died. That there was some sort of connection between that and the rejection of former truth. And the reason I believe that is because of the chiasm in history, because when he was publishing the truth, his son was saved. But when he was attacking one of the most important truths in Adventist history. And the reason I gave earlier, some new people have joined the call. The reason I gave earlier was because you can be an anti-Trinitarian and not be a Seventh-day Adventist. You can believe in the sanctuary message and not be an Adventist. You can believe in Ellen White's writings and not be an Adventist, a health message and not be an Adventist. You can find ways to do that, but you can't reason your way out of believing in the 25. You can't believe in the 2520 and reason yourself out of being a Seventh-day Adventist. If there's one doctrine that cements people into this movement more than any other doctrine, it's not the Sabbath. You can be a Sabbatarian and not be a Seventh-day Adventist, but you can't believe that God scattered a people, and then when that scattering would end and he would gather those people back together, whatever people are being gathered together in that year constitutes God's true denominated people. And that's why I believe that the 2520 is the first pillar. That's why it's the very first pillar and most foundational doctrine of all other doctrines. And that's why it has to be given its place. So it's not to say that it's the most glorious truth we have or the most important truth even, but it does deserve its right place as the first truth and the foundational truth. And again, I think all those other things that I said stand about you can be an anti-Trinitarian, Sabbath keeper, and miss White's writings and not really be a Seventh-day Adventist. You could probably even hold the sanctuary doctrine in some form and not truly be a Seventh-day Adventist, but you cannot believe in the 2520 and not conclude that the Seventh-day Adventist people are God's denominated people. And that's the testimony. That's how the world is going to see it, I believe. And I believe that this message is going to be one of the most powerful truths, again, just as it was before 44. So that's why it's important. I think God has left this history for us that we may be in fear of rejecting this or not giving testimony to this or congregating with people or not separating over this or not allowing this message to do the work of the shaking that it's supposed to do. That being quiet on this issue or not agitating this issue as it ought to be agitated. Okay. Nobody is safe. Nobody is not under a curse. Rejecting or rashly denying this light. You fall off the path into darkness. Okay, continuing. History tells us that a small group of post-1844 Adventists continued their journey toward greater light. As time crept on, it is also no secret that many Advent leaders, including James White, Uriah Smith, Jane Andrews, and others, began to revisit William Miller's earlier teaching that 2520 was a legitimate prophecy in Scripture. Finally, they concluded that it wasn't real. Were they wrong? I'd like to also mention that none of these men were able to finish the work. And this is one reason why. There was others, I'm sure, but this is one reason why. They failed in that effort. Okay, but this generation will not fail in that work. And we can't just make up some message and think that that's going to usher in the second coming of Christ. The only way for Christ to come back is to give the message that he has given to us, is to proclaim the message that he's given to us. We're under obligation to preach the 2520 and make it forcible. That means to make it a salvational test question. And this article that I'm about to read is absolute fallacy, and it's actually disgusting. This is absolute trash, this article. And I can't believe that this has any weight with people. This is nothing less than the republishing of the arguments of the fallen churches of Babylon. I'm going to show you something how William Miller felt about this. This is sin, brothers and sisters. Okay, so this is Miller talking to Himes. I have taken notice that Dowling's argument concerning the 7 times in Leviticus 26, 18, 21, 24, 28, because the punishment of the people of God is mentioned 4 times, they must therefore be punished 4 times 7 prophetic years. Okay, let's just stop there. This is Dowling's argument. And he's saying that because 7 times is mentioned 4 times, it must be 10,080 years. This is in the mouth of many of our opponents. So this is what the fallen churches were saying. This is what the fallen churches of Babylon were saying against Miller and his associates. The argument was so weak and silly, I did not think any person of common capacity of intellect would be deceived by it. Yet I find to my astonishment that many of Dowling's satellites are reiterating his argument from the pulpit and press and laughing as they think at the easy credulity of the common people. But I have thought such men as Folsom, Haverville would not show their stupidity or expose themselves to ridicule by using so weak and contemptible an objection. Yet I am disappointed in the man. Anything with him to puzzle, perplex, and throw darkness on the mind of the reader. This argument amount is this: because God has foretold by Moses that he would punish his people or chastise them for their iniquity 7 times, and because Moses had reminded them of it 4 times, then they must be punished for 7 times, making 10,080 years. Then by the same rule, the divine writer of the Psalms makes God's mercies endure 26 forevers. And Daniel makes Nebuchadnezzar 4 times 7 years insane. Obviously, none of us would think that, right? When Nebuchadnezzar was told that he would eat grass for 7 years, just because God mentioned it again somewhere else doesn't mean that it becomes 14, 21, 28. Right? And the same thing for the 7 times punishment. The argument is so weak and silly, and this is not Miller is he's fairly tactful in his speech. I've never seen him use the word, for instance, stupidity. I think this is the first time I've seen him use that word. But there is an astonishment here by this. This type of language is used elsewhere as well. This is so. For instance, this is in 1844. We are as much astonished at the rejection of this period, the 2520, as we should have been had he rejected the 2300 days. And that's the spirit that I hope to instill in everybody, is that when we look up in the chart, if somebody was like if someone told us, if some Adventist told us, I don't really believe in the 2300 days anymore, I'm done with that prophecy. What kind of relationship would you have with that person at that point? I think that's something to seriously meditate upon. You should be as much astonished for them rejecting this period as if for the 2520 as the 2300 days. So we used to think, what kind of person is this? Now, notice this: the prophetic period, Leviticus 26, or what has been supposed to be such, has been no small object of study among prophetical expositors. It has been supposed that the expression 7 times in verses 18, 21, 24, 28 denoted a prophetic period of 25-20 years, and that this period covered the time during the throne of Israel, during which the throne of Israel should be or remain subverted or trodden down by oppressing powers. To rightly fix the commencement and termination of this period became therefore a matter of consequence. Where does it commence and where does it end have been questions of much study and perhaps some perplexity. This is very, very interesting. This is very, very interesting because it wasn't too long before that, let's say around 15 years, that Miss White was writing this. So let's just go back, let's just go back to here. Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those that gave the judgment hour cry. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily. But in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced and darkness and confusion have followed. Time has not been a test since 1844 and will never again be the test. What is being spoken of here? Okay, first notice that before 1844, there was union and all were united nearly on the correct view. But in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced and darkness and confusion have followed. Before 1844, concerning these prophetic periods, there wasn't confusion. The daily was understood to commence at 508. The 2300 days, 457. The 2520, 677. They understood that there was some circle of years, but they went with, and what that means is there's a window of time for each prophetic period. Let me just explain this really quick. There's about the chronologers all have about a 4-year window. If you look at all the chronologers and you line them and you categorize and you put all their views out on a spectrum, there's a small window of time for when they believe the captivity of Manasseh was. Some people will say, 677. Others will say 676. There's about a 4-year window for each period for when they commence. Some will say 457. Some will say 454. Okay. So there was a, but they went with the weight of evidence. They went with what they thought was the best chronology. And on each prophetic period, it also caused a harmonious termination of all the prophetic periods. And that would be in around the time of 1843. So they're like, this is what it must be. The prophetic periods have bearing on one another. It's like chemistry or in like music where you have definite portions. And just like a chord, and a major chord is a 1, a 3, and a 5 on a scale. So with the prophetic periods, you have the 25, 26, 77, 457, you have a relationship there because when they terminate is the same. So they had determined, okay, we have unlocked the chronology of the Bible. We have unlocked these prophetic periods. And what God was saying is, though the vision seemed to tarry, though you went through this disappointment, don't think that those prophetic periods were wrong. You had gotten it right. Some people tried to start pushing them into the future, the 2520, the 2300 days, the 1335. And that is the context. That is the history of what we're reading about here. That confusion and darkness have followed. Now it's even seeped into our own church. As we read here, to rightly fix the commencement and termination of this period, because therefore a matter of consequence, where does it commence? Where does it end? Have been the questions of much study and perhaps some perplexity. Again, I'm just going to give my personal view. It is easier to identify the commencement of the 7 times than it is the 2300 days, because the commencement of the 7 times even has another prophetic period which leads into that one. If we go to Isaiah 7:8, it says, within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people. And we know that Hosea says when Israel falls, Judah will fall with them. And Manasseh went into captivity the very year that Ephraim was completely depopulated. And so from 742, in the first year of Ahaz, 65 years down, takes us to 677 when this happened. So this is wicked unbelief right here. This is either coming from a lack of study or some sort of wicked unbelief, or caring too much of what their opponents say. I don't know what it is, but it's inexcusable. We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget how the Lord led us in his teachings in our past history. And so that's an example of that. There wasn't confusion before 1844 when union existed. Nobody was struggling like this. They were astonished that you weren't believing in this. They thought you were foolish. They thought you were stupid. That's how they felt. That's sincerely how they felt. They pronounced you a fallen church of Babylon. They said, we can't even fellowship with you. And now you're going to come around and publish this garbage. And the inspiration says James White's mind wasn't fit to write in a review around this era. And then the teachers in our day have the audacity to say things like, if God's true people have led by inspiration and kindled by the Holy Spirit, they have the ability to alter the chart. Miss White says, don't alter that chart. The figures were just as God wanted them. And this is why God sees them as drunk people puking on the chart. He holds them in contempt. He holds them in utter disgust. Like I use this analogy a lot, like frat boys pissing on themselves and vomiting everywhere on the beer pong table and all of that degenerate behavior. This is degenerate spirituality right before us. These are not the questions, however, that we propose here to discuss, for there is a question lying back of these which demands to be answered first. Namely, is there any prophetic period to view at all in Leviticus 26. We claim that there is not, and we'll offer a few of what are to us the very conclusive reasons to this position. Okay, continuing. So then, there is no prophetic period in Leviticus 26, and those who imagine that such a thing exists, it looks like the rest of the article is, it looks like they're paraphrasing it, but he gets into a higher critical argument that it's actually not a noun, but it is an adverb. It functions like an adverb, an adjective, and it's modifying. It's not actually a noun. It doesn't actually mean time. However, if you go online, if you go into the Interlinear Bible, anybody can check this, which is based on the Masoretic texts, which are deemed the most accurate texts. It is a noun. So they didn't get that right. They didn't get that right. Even if they had, we would still trust the King James translation and we still proof text it out, comparing scripture with scripture, but they didn't get that right. I truly don't believe that they got that right. And anybody can go on the Interlinear Bible. So their argument is this: a false higher critical argument, and that because it's mentioned 4 times, it should then there be 10,080 years. That is what exists. And don't you see now why they pronounce these churches the fallen churches of Babylon, and how they were strengthened in their positions the more that they heard the objections? And those are the same biblical arguments that exist today. It creates a new prophecy chart. Yes. The one his son died in the creation of. As men that are, these are the men that are blind. It's ironic that they call it prophecy's blind date. That's actually, I've never noticed it until this very moment in time, because it's actually God that is calling them blind. It's actually God that's calling them blind. And he says in Isaiah, let's end right here. The vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. He saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. The verse before says, the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers and your seers hath he covered. They are blind. The Lord calls them blind. This is audacious. This is absolute. This is reprehensible. That they are woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. There is a woe pronounced upon these people. The people that are actually seeing, blessed are the eyes that saw the things in 1843 and 1844. Blessed are your eyes, for they see, the Bible says. And the devil is calling you blind, is trying to intimidate you. Prophecy's blind date. You can buy that. Well, actually, they're giving it away for free. Prophecy's blind date. How ironic. One finger pointing and 3 fingers pointing back.